The night I almost didn't make it out of that Airbnb started with a knock I almost ignored. I'd been driving for 6 hours straight from Cincinnati to Nashville for a nursing conference that my hospital had been pushing me to attend for months. I'm not someone who travels much alone. I do it because the job requires it, not because I enjoy it. I prefer my own couch, my own coffee maker, my own locks. But the hotel rates near the convention center were brutal that weekend. Over $300 a night, and a colleague had suggested I try an Airbnb instead. Save money, she said. It'll be fine, she said. I booked a small guest suite attached to a private home in a quiet neighborhood about 12 minutes from the venue. The listing looked perfect. Clean photos, a 5-star rating, a Superhost badge, and dozens of reviews from people who all said the same thing. Lovely place. Very safe. Felt like home. The host went by the name Mark T., and his profile photo showed a middle-aged man with a friendly smile standing in front of what looked like the same house. I read through everything carefully. I always do. I pulled up around 8:30 that Friday evening. The neighborhood was older, leafy, the kind of place where people leave their porch lights on and the streets are named after trees. The guest suite had its own entrance through a side gate, exactly as described. I punched in the lockbox code from the app, grabbed the key, and let myself in. It smelled like clean laundry and lemon. There were fresh towels folded on the bed and a little handwritten card on the nightstand that said, "Welcome. Let me know if you need anything, Mark." I texted my sister right away. "Made it. Place is cute. Locking up now." She replied, "Good. Text me before you sleep." I set my bag down, changed out of my travel clothes, and opened my laptop to go over my notes for the next morning's panel. That's when I heard the first knock. It came from the main house door, not my entrance, but the door that connected the guest suite to the interior of the house. There was a sliding bolt on my side, and I had locked it the moment I walked in. I hadn't thought much about it at the time. Just habit. I looked at the door, knocked again, then a man's voice. "Hey, just wanted to make sure you got in okay. I'm Mark." I relaxed a little. Of course, the host. I walked toward the door, my hand almost on the bolt. And then I stopped. Something felt off. Not loud, not obvious, just a quiet wrongness that I couldn't name right away. The voice was friendly. Too friendly almost. And Mark's profile had said he lived off-site. I remembered reading that specifically because it was one of the reasons I'd chosen the listing. Host does not reside on property. I stepped back from the door. "I'm good, thanks," I called out, keeping my voice light. "Just settling in." A pause. Then, "Great. Just wanted to introduce myself. If you want, I can show you how the thermostat works. It's a little tricky." I figured it out, but thank you. Another pause. Longer this time. "Okay, have a good night." The footsteps moved away from the door. I stood there without moving for a full minute, just listening. Then I went back to my laptop. I told myself I was being paranoid. A man knocking on his own guest suite door wasn't a crime. But I checked the bolt anyway, twice. Then I pushed the small wooden chair from the desk under the door handle, the way my dad taught me when I was in college. Old habit. 20 minutes later, there was another knock. This time it came from outside, from my private entrance. The side gate entrance that required the lockbox code. My stomach dropped. I didn't move. I waited. A woman's voice this time. Quiet, hurried. "Excuse me. I'm so sorry to bother you. I live next door. I need to talk to you. Please, just for a second." I went to the window and pulled back the curtain just enough to see. A woman stood outside, maybe 60 years old, small, wearing a cardigan despite the warmth. She was looking around nervously, her hands clasped together in front of her. I cracked the window instead of opening the door. "Can I help you?" She looked up at me and her expression shifted. Relief, then something closer to urgency. She spoke quickly, just above a whisper. "That man who knocked on your door. He's not Mark." The real Mark hasn't owned this property for almost 4 months. Someone hacked his account. I've been trying to report it and nobody believes me. Please don't open any doors for him. Don't let him inside for any reason." I stared at her. "How do you know this?" I asked. "Because the same thing happened to the woman who stayed here 3 weeks ago," she said. "She called the police after." I gave a statement. "They said they were looking into it, but nothing happened. I've been watching this house ever since." She glanced back toward the front of the property. "His van is parked on the next block. He does this every weekend there's a new guest." My mouth went dry. "What happened to the woman 3 weeks ago?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. She pressed her lips together. "She got out. Barely." I grabbed my phone off the bed. "My name is Loretta," she said through the window. "I know this is a lot. I know you don't know me, but please don't open that door. I believe you," I said. And I meant it. I called 911 immediately. The dispatcher was calm and collected and asked me to stay on the line. I told her everything. The knock from inside the house, the man's voice, the second knock from outside, what Loretta had told me. She said officers were being dispatched and to stay inside, keep both doors locked, and don't engage with anyone until they identified themselves through the window. I texted my sister, "Something is wrong at this Airbnb." I called the police. "I'm locked in. Do not panic, but stay by your phone." She called back in 15 seconds. I let it go to voicemail. I couldn't talk. I needed to listen. The house was quiet for a few minutes. Then I heard something I hadn't expected. Movement on the roof of the side entrance overhang, just above my window. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I backed toward the far wall, my heart slamming so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I looked up at the ceiling as if I could see through it. The footsteps stopped directly above my head. Then came a sound I will never forget for the rest of my life. The slow, metallic grind of something being inserted into the outer window frame. He was trying to pop the lock from above. I screamed into the phone. "Someone is on the roof trying to get through my window." The dispatcher's voice came back immediately, firm and clear. "Officers are 1 minute out. Move away from the window. Get to the bathroom if you can. Lock yourself in." I grabbed my phone, my car keys, and my bag and ran into the bathroom. I locked the door and pressed my back against the wall beside the toilet, crouched low, phone to my ear. I could hear the window frame straining. Then, through the thin walls, I heard Loretta's voice from outside. Loud now, not whispering anymore. "I already called the police. They're coming right now. I have your license plate." A beat of silence. Then the sound of boots hitting the ground as someone dropped from the overhang. Running footsteps. A gate swinging. Then sirens. 2 officers arrived within seconds of each other, their lights cutting through the window slats. I heard them call out in the front, heard Loretta's voice directing them. I stayed in the bathroom until one of them knocked on my private entrance and set his name and batch number through the door before I opened it. He was young, maybe late 20s, professional, calm. He looked around the room quickly and then looked at me. "You okay?" "Not really," I said honestly. "Fair enough. Come outside when you're ready. We have some questions." Outside, Loretta was already talking to a second officer, her arms crossed, her voice steady. She had a folder in her hand, printed pages, photographs, a handwritten timeline. She had been preparing this for weeks. She handed it to the officer without being asked. I sat on the low stone wall near the gate and watched her. She had done all of this, documented everything, stayed vigilant, knocked on my window in the dark. For a stranger she'd never met, the officers explained what they could. The Airbnb account had been compromised approximately 16 weeks earlier. The real host, who did in fact live out of state, had no idea his listing had been fraudulently reactivated after he'd temporarily deactivated it. The man who'd been using it had rotated through at least 6 documented stays, targeting solo women, using the interior connecting door as his method of access. In most cases, Guests had opened the door, thinking it was a standard host check-in. The previous guest who hadn't opened it, the one from 3 weeks earlier, had reported it, but the case had stalled. Loretta's documentation was the most complete record anyone had. She's the reason we're going to be able to actually charge him this time, one of the officers told me quietly. They found the man 2 blocks away, sitting in a white cargo van with the engine running. He had a second set of keys to the property, a burner phone, and a bag that the officers wouldn't describe to me in detail. They said I didn't need to know what was in it. I believed them and I didn't ask again. I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time after that. An officer had offered to arrange a hotel room through a victim assistance program, and I'd said yes without thinking. I wasn't going back inside that suite. I wasn't going back inside any Airbnb for a long time, maybe ever. Before I left, I walked over to Loretta. She was still talking to one of the officers, but she saw me coming and turned. "Thank you," I said. It felt completely inadequate. She looked at me for a moment, then shook her head slightly. "I didn't do enough the first time," she said. I saw things I explained away. I told myself it wasn't my business. She paused. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. I didn't know what to say to that. I just nodded. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a small piece of folded paper. She pressed it into my hand. "My number," she said. "In case anyone gives you trouble with the report, I'll back up everything you say." I drove to the hotel the victim assistance program had arranged, a regular chain hotel, nothing fancy, everything visible and above board. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while without turning on the lights. My sister called 3 times before I picked up. "I'm fine," I told her. "You're not fine," she said. "But you're alive. So we're going to start there." She was right. We started there. The conference the next morning felt surreal. I sat in a panel about patient safety protocols and thought about how differently that word safety had felt 12 hours earlier. Not abstract, not theoretical, not a slide in a PowerPoint. Just a locked door and an old woman in a cardigan and the specific sound of sirens getting louder. I gave my statement to the detective assigned to the case 2 days later, over the phone, back in Cincinnati. She told me the suspect had a prior arrest in another state for a similar incident, a fraudulent short-term rental situation that had resulted in an assault charge that was eventually reduced. She said my case, combined with Loretta's documentation and the previous guest's report, would make it significantly harder for his attorney to negotiate down. "The prior victim," I asked. "From 3 weeks ago. Is she okay?" A pause. "She's cooperating with the investigation. That's all I can share." I understood. I hoped she was more than okay. I hoped she was the kind of okay that comes with time and with knowing it wasn't her fault, because it wasn't. It wasn't mine either, but understanding that and feeling it are 2 entirely different things, and I won't pretend otherwise. The thing that stayed with me, that I kept coming back to in the weeks after, was how close I'd come to opening that first door. When the man knocked and said he was Mark, something in me had almost moved toward the bolt. It would have taken 2 seconds. One small, automatic gesture. That's all. What stopped me was a detail in a listing description. Host does not reside on property. 4 words I'd read 2 weeks earlier on a booking page and somehow retained without knowing I'd retained them. And one quiet instinct that said something isn't right here, even when I couldn't explain why. I thought about that a lot. I've been a nurse for 11 years. I work night shifts in a busy emergency department. I've seen the aftermath of violence more times than I can count. I've always believed that I'd recognize danger when it came close. But danger doesn't announce itself. It doesn't knock on the door and say, "I'm here to hurt you." It says, "I just wanted to make sure you got in okay," in a voice that sounds completely normal. And then it waits to see if you'll open the door. Loretta filed a formal complaint with the platform 3 weeks after the arrest. She sent me a copy of the emails she wrote. 6 paragraphs, specific dates, specific account numbers. A direct request for a policy review on how compromised host accounts are reactivated. I don't know if anything came of it, but she sent it. She kept pushing. I reported the listing myself as well, through every channel I could find. I wrote a review, not just a star rating, a detailed written account, and flagged it as a safety concern. Whether it stays up or gets buried in the platform's review process, I have no way of knowing, but I wrote it. The suspect was formally charged 8 weeks after my stay. 2 counts of criminal trespass, 1 count of attempted burglary, and, because of what was found in the van, a weapons charge. His trial date is pending. The detective said I may be asked to testify, and I said yes before she finished the sentence. I don't post my travel plans online anymore. I stopped doing it entirely, not just the destination, but the dates, the neighborhood, the excited for this trip captions that used to feel harmless. They don't feel harmless anymore. Someone had accessed that previous guest's booking information, the detective told me, partly through data she'd shared publicly, a tagged post at the Nashville airport, a comment on a travel group of good Airbnb neighborhoods near the convention center, breadcrumbs. All of it breadcrumbs. I'm not saying I was naive. I'm saying the rules of what's safe to share changed and nobody told us clearly enough. And some people are paying close attention to everything we broadcast without thinking about it. My sister flew out to visit me the weekend after I got home. We sat on my porch with coffee and she didn't ask me a lot of questions, which was exactly right. She just sat there. At one point she said, "I'm glad you read the listing carefully." And I laughed, which surprised both of us. Because it's true and it's absurd and it's also exactly the kind of thing that saves your life. Not heroics, not training. Just 4 words on a web page that you happen to remember. A few months later, I got a message through a community safety group in my area. Loretta had connected with them after the arrest and mentioned my name, and one of the organizers reached out to ask if I'd be willing to speak at one of their events. They work specifically with women who travel frequently for work. I said yes. I've spoken twice now. The first time I was shaking the entire time and I read most of it from notes. The second time I didn't use notes at all. Both times, someone came up to me afterward and said some version of the same thing. I would have opened the door. Not as a confession. More like a realization. That's why I share it. Not to scare anyone. Not to make traveling alone feel impossible, because it isn't, and it shouldn't be. But because the gap between something feels off, and I'm probably being paranoid, is the exact space where a lot of preventable things happen. And the only way to close that gap a little is to talk about it honestly, the way I'm talking about it now. I still travel for work. I book hotels now, not home share rentals, and I always verify the host directly through official channels before I arrive anywhere unfamiliar. I check whether the host is listed as on-site or off-site. I read the reviews the way a detective reads a case file, looking for what's missing, not just what's there. I bring a doorstop alarm that fits under any door. I have Loretta's number still saved in my phone, under her name, and I've never deleted it. Some habits you form out of routine. Some you form because of one night in Nashville when a stranger in a cardigan knocked on your window in the dark and told you the truth when she had no reason to accept that she'd promised herself she would. I think about her every time I check a lock. I think I always will. If you've ever had a moment where something felt wrong and you ignored it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you've ever had a moment where you listened to that feeling, even when you couldn't explain it, even when part of you said you were overreacting, then you already know how much that matters. You might not know yet, but you will. Pay attention. Read the details. Trust what doesn't make sense in your gut before it makes sense in your head. And if you found this story, please share it with someone who travels alone. It might be the thing they remember when they need it most. Subscribe if you want to hear more real stories like this one, and let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And have you ever had a moment where your instincts saved you? I read every single one. I've thought a lot about what actually saved me that night, and the honest answer is uncomfortable, because it wasn't anything dramatic. It wasn't training or quick reflexes or some survival instinct I'd developed from years of working emergency medicine. It was 4 words I'd read on a webpage 2 weeks before I ever stepped foot in Nashville. Host does not reside on property. That's it. That's the thing that stopped my hand from sliding open a bolt. I think about that a lot. How much depends on the details we almost don't bother to read. We skim. We click through, we trust the star rating and move on. And most of the time, that works out fine. Most of the time, nothing happens. But every once in a while, the fine print is the only thing standing between you and something you can't take back. Loretta had read the situation clearly for weeks before I ever arrived. She'd watched, documented, reported, and been ignored. She did it anyway. She kept the folder. She stayed up late. She knocked on a stranger's window in the dark because she had made a private promise to herself after a moment of her own inaction. A moment she still carried, that kind of quiet persistence, the kind that doesn't get seen or rewarded, the kind you do simply because it's right. I think that's one of the most honest forms of courage there is. Not the loud kind. The kind that shows up again after it failed once. What happened to me wasn't random in the way we like to think bad things are random. Someone had studied the patterns, the public posts, the tagged locations, the comments in travel groups. They had built a system around the small things people share without thinking, and I had fed that system without knowing it. I can't pretend otherwise. I don't say that to shame anyone who does the same, because I did it too, cheerfully and without a second thought. Right up until the moment I understood why it mattered. There's a kind of wisdom that only comes from getting close enough to something to feel its weight. You can read about online privacy in an article and nod and do nothing, or you can sit on the edge of a hotel bed in a city that isn't yours, shaking, replaying every public post you made in the last month, and feel the knowledge settle into your bones in a way that never leaves. I got the second kind. I didn't choose it. But I'm not going to waste it. The thing I keep coming back to is this. The people who tried to hurt me counted on the gap between something feels off and I'm probably overreacting. That gap is where they operated. That gap is what they built their whole method around. And closing that gap, just a little, just enough to pause before you open the door, is not paranoia. It is the quietest, most ordinary form of self-respect. Ryan still checks in with me every time I travel. Loretta and I exchange a message every few weeks. The detective handling the case called last month with an update on the trial date. Life went on. It does that, whether you're ready or not. But I carry this story carefully now, because someone else's Loretta might not be next door, and sometimes the only thing that fills that role is something you heard from a stranger at the right moment before you needed it. That's why I share it. And that's why I'll keep sharing it.